the word love is a completely misunderstood and even distorted concept in most people's lives. It's confused with things like the need for security, the need for someone to validate you, the need for comfort, for nurturing, for intimacy. Obviously, love and sex have become interchangeable words when they may be completely two different worlds. You could have one without the other, which is very clear. And so it's a word that is everybody uses. I love you, I don't love you, I fell in love, I fell out of love, I need love, I'm missing love, I want love, I have love. You have people who say they love each other to the death, and they're actually ready to kill each other. It gets fulfilled, self-fulfilling prophecy. 2 years later, they're in divorce court, literally ready to murder each other. So what was the love they had? Was it an illusion? And then how do we differentiate between infatuation, obsessions, our own fantasies, our own deep insecurities, and latching onto someone because you think this person's going to save you, or this is now the love? Or is it a drug? For some, we'll identify it as a drug that just covers up on the real issues. And as long as you can get away with that, you can call it love, and it sounds very nice and romantic. So the animal kingdom doesn't have all these problems because they work like a clock. They do what they got to do, and that's it. They're not busy buying best-selling books called love. They don't need to look at videos of how to love or the 10 steps of secrets to find love. They naturally have innately whatever they need in each species in its own particular way of how they court each other or they don't court each other. It's very efficient. In the human condition, as some evolutionary theorists have said, there's a lot of inefficiency, because of the neurosis and all the different, some of them that I mentioned before, of people's strange things that they do with this thing called love. And it's not just straightforward to human beings who are both healthy and they both look to find a way to connect and so on. In the animal world, there's no such thing as psychotic animals or neurotic animals, unless humans, of course, mess around with them. Like a guy told me, a couple told me they have a dog, and they take the dog to a veterinarian, basically an animal psychologist. This animal psychologist says the dog is showing signs of high stress, and that he's asking the owners to calm down when they come home, and they shouldn't be fighting so much because they're causing the dog a state. The dog may soon need some medication, which I found to be, quite ironic. But the point being that so whenever you talk about a topic like love, it's critical to not to be naive and to just jump into it and make believe like everything is great, and now we just have to tinker and fix a few little things and everything will be solved. I would submit that in most cases the whole foundation is either non-existent or distorted. And I'll try to talk about some of those things. So you may say, okay, so where do I get my ideas from? How do you know my ideas aren't distorted? Well, you can feel they are, and that's that. So we compare notes, and everybody comes to their conclusions. All I can do is submit some ideas that I have taken from the Torah, from life experience. And as everything in life, if it resonates and experience shows that it works, great. And if it doesn't work, it could be the greatest ideas, they're meaningless. So the point of sitting here is to try to cut through the weeds and the smoke screens, try to understand these forces in our lives in a pure way. So the best place always to look for purity is actually to look at things that are not man-made. That's why I mentioned nature. Nature, nobody can argue with. Nature is nature. No humans created it, so you can't really argue. It's just the way it works. It's like you can't argue with the fact the sun rises in the morning. You can't argue with the fact that certain creatures, how they breathe, how they mate, how they connect, and so on. And then there is also another place we can look, which is a little closer to home, is ourselves, but in our pure forms. So what's the purest form of ourselves? When we were young children. So though young children don't have necessarily sophisticated adult relationships, but they are us in an earlier stage, and everything that we are began there in a microcosm before it became jaded and shaped or chained or distorted by adults. So to see how children love and react to love, and how their relationship is, even though you can't call it yet intimate love, or sexual love, or romantic in that sense, but you still can call the basic elements of human nature, of whatever love it is. Children need love, absolutely. And I would even go a step further when children are deprived of love, for whatever reason, or they don't know where it's coming from, or they don't know if it's coming. That is probably the single strongest impact on how their relationships will develop as they turn into adults. I'm ready to say that hands down without even a question. So both how they're loved, how they're not loved, or whether they had consistent love, or whether they knew where it was coming from, or whether they knew they can rely on. In any, however, whatever shape and form, is the single biggest ingredient that impacts the rest of our lives. Which of course is good news and also can be bad news, because we can't go back and turn the clock back to that point and just rewire ourselves. We are now products, for good or for bad, of our childhoods. But if you're an honest person and you really want to find yourself, it's important to at least identify and try to retrace the steps and reconnect. And that's really what the Torah is about, and that's really what the month of Elul is about. It's every year we're given a month where we're given the opportunity to realign ourselves. But to do so sometimes requires a pretty brutal introspection and soul searching, which actually the word Elul comes from the word search. It means search in Aramaic. So, which is the essence of this month. It's a soul searching. It's a self-auditing. Like the name at the beginning of this chapter, Sheftim v'Sheftim titn lecha b'chol sharecha. You shall appoint for yourselves judges and law enforcers at all your gates. And as the Sifsei Khan on the Torah interprets this, he says, what's titn lecha? Appoint to yourself. So he says, because all of us have 7 gates. 7 gates that connect you and the outside world, and everyone around you, including those you love. Those 7 gates are the 2 eyes, the 2 ears, the 2 nostrils, and the mouth. These are 7 gates. And the Torah is saying, appoint, basically, don't just let whatever happens to come in or go out. Everything should be monitored in a person's life. Just like you have, just like your body, your skin, your hair, your outer layers protect infections and bacteria. You don't let everything enter to the side of the body. God forbid, when something enters inside, it can cause a lot of problems. So we have outer layers that are screeners, they're filters. The hair itself captures so much bacteria, it protects us. That's why, God forbid, when a person is in surgery, you need to have very high state of sterilization, because when the body is open, it doesn't have its protective layers, it's very prone to any type of infection. It's extremely sensitive. So just like on a very that's the natural part. So we're also told the area that you have control over, which is what you look at, what you hear, what you smell, and what you taste. The same thing, what you speak, and so on, back and forth. The gates that connect you and the world around you, point, make sure that you're careful, because that's what enters into you is what shapes you. And don't think you're immune. No one's immune. In today's world, how many subliminal and overt messages is constantly being inundating us? Our eyes, it's an assault on our senses. Overstimulation. And it's impossible even to quantify and to even measure its effects on us. I mentioned a while back when I was in Peru a few years ago, Lima, on a conference. It was on happiness. So it was a professor who was a co-panelist with myself. I spoke from a spiritual, psychological Torah perspective. He spoke from a secular perspective. And he said an interesting point, which I've shared with you here. And that was that per capita, the country that has the happiest people, according to statistics, is Holland, the Netherlands. And the people wonder why, and some say because everybody has health insurance there, it's a socialist country, or some other different reasons. And he came up with this idea, he was there, that in Holland there are no displays, there's no public advertisements, there are no billboards, and public advertisements. And he found a statistic that says the following, that in the West, in America especially, by the time you're age 20, you have seen 1 million advertisements, minimum. 1 million. I know that's a number it's hard to even fathom. By age 20. And now that includes everything, whether it's print advertising, whether it's TV, billboards, radio today, internet, and so on. Constant assault. Every time you walk into a store, every time you just walk down the street. We don't even measure these things. So this is going into our gates. And so many other things are going in that we don't even know. So the Torah is telling us a point, be careful. Audit yourself. Have judges and law enforcers. So the month of Elul, therefore it's appropriate we read this chapter, because that's what Elul is about, is the soul search, introspection. But particularly the focus I'm discussing here is around the area of love, which you can say really, in a broad sense, reflects all of our lives. Actually, the Zohar says it. It says chesed, which is love. Ozlim kula yamin. It's the first of the 7 emotions, and essentially it is the root of all other emotions, all other experiences. So to go back to the theme, therefore, Elul is an opportunity, a great opportunity to realign ourselves. So last week I discussed how that's done in a reciprocal relationship, a balanced relationship of ani l'deidi. I am to my beloved is to me, all the 4 steps, each of them. Where it's like, as I said, 2 circles that become one. So it's 2 units, individuals, that don't get compromised in their search and in their fusion, which of course is the optimal. But here there's another element to this, is this love and like thing. So let me define some words before I continue. As I said, I wanted to qualify with this word love, because I can be speaking here for a few hours about love, and then you come to realize that what I mean, what you mean, is not the same thing. So I don't want to waste that time. So let me state it at the outset. When I define the word love, I'm talking obviously a healthy state of love. One that is not, let's start with what it's not, and then we'll talk about what it is. It's not coming to compensate for something. That, for me, is a critical element. As soon as it's compensating for something, it may be a form of love. I'm not even saying that it's a bad thing per se, but it's not love what I'm talking about. Because then it's a medication, basically. I don't mean to be demeaning in any sense of the word, but then it's not what love can. Let's put it this way: it's definitely not. It's not definitely not expressing the full potential of love. It's love that needs to compensate for something, which of course tells you that as soon as it finishes compensating, the love may not be needed anymore, and the love will be conditional on that compensation. So why would you love somebody if it's based on compensation? If it's not filling some void inside of you, that's not the love I'm talking about. Now, is it possible to find human beings that have a love that is absolutely not filling any needs? No, I don't think it's possible. The question, however, is whether it's driven and begins and ends with needs, or does it have another dimension to it? And as we'll see in this discussion, that if you look at searching for a healthier love, you have to look at something that's not based on your definition of it. If it's based on your definition, you're going to get what you ask for. So the first thing that El really challenges us to maybe look for a new definition. Now, it doesn't mean a radically new one. It doesn't mean that you have to throw out everything that you've ever thought about love or experienced and so on. Because I'm sure people, even in all situations, have had tastes of beautiful types of love. But if you want to grow, the first thing a person grows is you have to challenge yourself. You challenge your perception of what you think love means, and so on. So, briefly, there are 2 models of love. One is the model that, probably the more prevalent one. There might probably many more than 2, but I'm going to define 2 because I think they're broad enough to cover most circumstances. So we'll call one a love driven by need, a love driven by you, and we'll call the other one a love driven by transcendence. Okay? And here's the distinction. We all have needs. We need to eat, we need to sleep, we need to drink, we need shelter, we need security. Love can be defined as another need. It's different than food. Food you digest. It's obvious food is a material thing. Love is a more ethereal thing. Love is connected with a lot of elements that are not really measurable. But it's a need. Humans need it. Whether it's the need, as I mentioned, of security, is it the need for feeling companionship, not alone in this world? Is it the need to help you have the courage to be a greater person? Yeah, you can have all kinds of different ways to fill in the blanks. But then, as the Mishnah says, Avatli bedavar, a love that's dependent on something. So when that thing changes, the thing that's dependent on, then the love changes. It's called ulterior motive, or it's called conditional love. Then there's a love, as he describes in Tanya, in chapter love, Perik Lev. Lev in Hebrew is pronounced love, is Lamed Bey's heart. And love in chapter 32, where he says the following few words. He says that love is the transcendence of spirit over matter. It's the exact opposite of another need. It's actually how much you give, not how much you take. It's the ability to go beyond yourself. Because you can make an argument that love is really an extension of me. A parent loves a child because the child is its flesh and blood. You love somebody that's satisfying or serving you, so it's an extension of you serving yourself. Someone else is also worshiping you or serving you, so therefore you love them. If they stop serving you, why would you love them? However, as he interprets their love is a state. It's called a state of transcending yourself and your needs and being able to love something outside of you. In other words, the focus is not you and your needs, the focus is the outside of you, beyond you. In essence, when we say that all love originates from the love of God, is exactly that. Loving yourself, you don't need a commandment for that. You don't even need to be told to do that. Everybody loves themselves. That's natural. The ability to go love something beyond yourself, that is not natural. I mean, it's natural, we can do it, but I mean to say that requires a transcendent dimension. So love is really introducing a reality that's beyond yourself. And as such, you're able to love something outside of your own body. So the cardinal rule is the first and most important thing is self-preservation, survival of the fittest. How does love fit into that rule? So you look at any evolutionary theory, which is the first model of love, they'll say love is part of survival. That's why. You're ready to give up something, not because you're transcendent, because by giving up you get something in return. Like I've read, let's say, Richard Dawkins' The Selfish Gene. So he explains everything from the context of the selfish gene. Loving another gives you the security. So you give up something of your time and your energy because you get in return. It's all about your survival. From the Torah point of view, as elaborated in Tanya, it's the exact opposite. It's not about you. Love is actually transcending yourself and experiencing something that you can never experience on your own. So it's not about what you get. In return, you get something. You get great things from that. But it's not driven by a need. It's driven by actually getting outside of yourself, experiencing something beyond you. So with that being said, I'm not going to suggest that everybody can reach there in a moment, because the biggest impediment is our insecurity. If we were secure people, we'd have no problem searching for transcendence. But if we're not, then you say, if I'm going to leave myself alone, I'm going to look for something beyond me, I may disappear. That's why the most secure people are able to coexist with others. Their turf is secure. They don't need to fight for it. So there's no problem for them to go and now experience beyond them. They're confident that they will not wither away in their search for transcendence. But someone who's been fighting all their lives for security, it's not easy for them to go search for transcendence. And again, I'm not talking about someone who masquerades as being a transcendent individual and just simply a desperate person running for their lives. Because that exists too. There are many people who are very transcendent souls, but they're really just scared children. So not everybody that's looking and searching for the greater realities is necessarily coming from a place. Again, I'm not criticizing it per se, because everybody does what they do to survive and to function, to find some type of peace. But let's not confuse it with the fuller meaning of what love is all about. So now let's carry it back to, as I said, the discussion of loving and liking someone. So there's an expression, tainug tmidi ein tainug, which means, I guess, consistent pleasure. Or another word for it would be repeated pleasure, again and again, where it becomes common, is not considered pleasure. The definition of pleasure, like excitement, and like anything that stimulates, is some novelty, something new. You get used to something, it's hard to continue to have pleasure from it. Which is an argument made by some, especially in France and other places, against monogamy. Because the fact is, absence makes the heart fonder, and things that you're see every day that you're used to, it may be good for security, it's good for basic needs, but it's not good for passion. It's not good for adventure. Because adventure, by definition, requires some type of jolt, some type of newness, some novelty. What's the argument against that? So basically, two people who marry and they continue to live with each other for years and years and years, how can they maintain? How is it possible for them to maintain the spark, the excitement, as they have it in the beginning of their relationship? Yeah, you can say there's loyalty, there's comfort, you can say there's also just basic decency. But to say that it's as passionate as it was something new, it's not so simple. So you could end up saying, there are people I love in my life, but I like the excitement. I don't like being with them all the time because I need something new in my life. And then on the other hand, you can say a lot of things that I like, it's not who I want to live with. I like them, or I like it, but then I come back home where I want to have what I love, the things that are the foundations. Like, for example, every building needs a foundation. Would you say you love your foundation? Yeah, you could say you need it. But you like your foundation? No, it's just there, it's solid. Other things where you go out where there's no foundations, it's not your home, not your security. So you may have something you benefit from, something you like about it, but it's not something necessarily you can rely on. So this idea, and you see this all the time. There are people, family members. I was just met with a family, an individual speaking about his family. He says to me, I have brothers and sisters. I love them, I'll always love them. But I actually hate them also. Now, he didn't say hate as a contradiction to love. He meant he loves them and doesn't like them. Doesn't like their shtick. He doesn't like how they behave with this and this and that. But if you push him, he says, so what does that mean? He says, no, the love is there. If I'm needed, something, the emergency or something, I'm going to be there. I'll never write them off. It's my flesh and blood. Which is also good news, at least that, But what's an interesting understanding of the whole concept? So what's going on? So what is this love thing? Is it a biological connection, some genetic connection we have with someone, where you would never choose to be their brother or sister, but once you are, you love them, and the rest you don't need to do because you don't need to like them. You can make that argument. Now, obviously, if you can find reasons to like your brothers and sisters and be their best friend, that would be great, but it's not necessarily a guarantee. And the same thing, obviously, with a spouse. Well, a spouse is not genetic, it's not biological, it's someone you choose. But again, as I said, you could argue that after a while, you get used to somebody. So maybe there's a love, a commitment. There are people who even in divorce, and the connection between their exes, can be even deeper than the new people they meet and marry, and so on. Because they have this history, they know each other, there's certain knowns, and so on. So maybe even a deep love, but the love is not manifest. It's almost like I said, a foundation, and everything else doesn't work. It's just there. So, is it possible to be able to say that the person you love is also your best friend? To the point where you can actually say, I don't know whether I love you more than I like you, or I like you more than I love you. That's the presenting challenge. Well, let's talk a moment on a theological level about God, which is also, you can ask the same question. In this period in time, Moses is up on the mountain praying for the Jewish people who had built the golden calf. They betrayed God. And Moses is basically asking God to forgive the people. Now, I'm not going to put words in God's mouth. That's not my role. But let's just paraphrase somewhat. In a way, Moses was saying, listen, there's love between the two of you. You chose these people. You're connected to them. They go back to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They gave their lives for you. So they made a big mistake. God may answer, I love them, but I don't like them anymore because they don't behave in ways I don't want to hang out with them. That's what it says, for example, when a parent sees the children fighting, the parent doesn't want to come to a place where the children are fighting. That's why there's an expression that what a Chassidish upbringing can accomplish, which means when people sit together in unity, even Malach Michael, the great angel, cannot accomplish. Because unity elicits God's presence. It elicits so there could be a love, but if you don't like the situation, you don't want to hang around there. In a sense, that's what happened. God, there was, said, I don't like how they're behaving. Will will it ever extinguish the love? Maybe not. But relationship, I don't want to have with them. Moses, on the other hand, his intention was not just to maintain the love; he wanted to find it to be expressive. And this touches another issue, which is very often we hurt the people we love. You have, for example, the great, I don't know, call him paragon, but Oscar Wilde. I always like quoting him for whatever reason. Oscar Wilde said, "We kill the thing we love most." Okay. Very often, you'll find where people hurt each other, the intention, it could have been motivated by love. But being that our tools are very weak, the expression of it and how it came out can be very hurtful and destructive. Which means that no one's necessarily questioning that you have the love, or you have the capacity to love, but that doesn't mean you have the tools to love. As I stated earlier, every one of us is born from childhood on the capacity to love. You don't have to be taught to love. Children naturally love. What happens is, so when we say going to a class about love, no, a good class is going to teach you how to unlearn all the unhealthy habits you developed about love. That's what the goal is. So if we were able to just reconnect to the moment of natural, how a human being naturally loves, we wouldn't have any issues. The problem is, the first time we learn about love, or don't learn about it, or the distortions is from those around us. So, you see a child observing the first argument they ever see their parents arguing. For a child, it's a very jolting experience, a very revolting experience. Because they both the parents, the child loves both of them, sees them as being infallible, and sees them as being the source of my sustenance. So you can imagine what starts happening in the child's mind and heart when it starts seeing a battle. Doesn't know what to do with it. No way to process it. Doesn't make any sense. Which is why divorce is so hard on children. Why they blame themselves, because they can't blame their parents. There's no way, they don't know how to fathom this. And any other distortions that take place. So in truth, no one has to be taught how to love. What you have to learn how not to love. Meaning how not to love in the wrong way. Which we pick up from those around us, parents, educators, society, and then as adults. Where do we learn? We learn from what we see around us, the standards. You go to school. First time you meet a boy or a girl, etc., etc. What do we base it on? No one's trained us. There's no training courses in this. It's all trial and error, based on realities like the blind leading the blind. The Torah obviously comes to two things, as I said before. Number one is to help us unlearn unhealthy habits, and number two, learn to access and to understand and align ourselves to what real healthy love is. So in this context, when you say somebody has love in their heart, but they don't have the tools, what's going on exactly? Well, you can use an example. For instance, you have in every school room, in every class. I'm sure you remember my class. I remember there were always kids who were very shy, and teachers who especially were not trained sometimes misunderstood shyness as being stupidity. The child doesn't ask that. The student doesn't answer a question. Sometimes the most brilliant students just happen to be shy. They have plenty to say. Now, someone who's trained and understands can recognize that. So what's going on? So using a Hasidic formula, if you wish, almost like a type of algorithm, a person's achievements in this world is going to be a ratio of their faculties over their, we call, garments. I'll explain what I mean. You can have very great brain power, chachma bina das. Your brain can be very powerful. But the way to express chachma bina das, you may be very weak in that. If no one trained you how to think organized, for example, or how to speak in an organized way, how to write in an organized way, so your ideas are going to come out very confusing. You'll say B before A and C before D, D before C, So the idea is there, and you may feel that you expressed it, but you were not trained the tools. It's like you have within your insides, you have the well springs of wisdom, but you don't have the pail the tools, the instruments, how to draw it out properly. Then you have people who may not have quite the same level of intense energy, intense power in their brain power, or emotional power for that matter, but their tools are well fine-tuned, because they've even been trained, or sometimes some people just pick it up, whatever it may be. So you can have a tremendous amount of talent, what the Hasidic language calls keiches, faculties within you, power and potential, but you don't have the instruments. And you could have great instruments and not necessarily have so much within. Obviously, you really need both. So when you're taught language, and you're taught, let's say, we'll call it the art of writing, of communicating, what you're really taught is tools, how to use the tools to elicit ideas in a more organized way, and those ideas, then you'll be able to express them and even express to yourself in a more profound way. Because remember, that's not just speech. Even thinking, there are people who think in an organized way and people who think in a disorganized way. And this thought to yourself, let alone to others. So there's two separate things completely. You cannot know from a person's intelligence which one it is unless you're trained. Because you don't know, is it really great instruments or is it the great faculties? You often find people who struggle and work hard and exert themselves, and they come to certain depths of understanding that another person who's far more brilliant but is lazy and never works hard, their ideas are going to be superficial. So they may grasp things quickly, but they're not thorough, and they'll make their mistakes. So there's many ways to measure these two things. The same thing you can say with love. Love is a faculty of the heart, which is a gift, a birthright that every one of us has. You're born with it. Just like you're born with eyes and ears, you're born with a soul. That soul has chesed, gvura, tiferes. Love is the first, most predominant emotion. Everyone has love in their hearts. But it's a faculty. A faculty means it's like an untapped reservoir, full of energy. Then there's a second thing called instruments, tools. Never confuse the two. If you're having difficulty loving in a healthy way, or finding love, most likely it's instruments, not necessarily that you have a lack of love within your heart. You may have you do. Because somewhere deep inside, you definitely have a very healthy form of chesed. But it could be locked inside. Imagine it like being a wellspring deep under the ground, a mile down under the ground. A well of the most fresh and most refreshing and powerful water. But you have no way to access it. Or if you access it, it's in a very limited way. So the important thing to understand, we say a month like Anila Deidi Li, that there's the reality of having these forces, and then there's the instruments of how to express them. What happened when the Jews built the golden calf? How is it possible that at 39 days, from when they heard, for the first time and only time in history, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, do not build false gods. They should go ahead and build the golden calf. I mean, these are not simple people. They had witnessed unbelievable things. They're called actually Dardeya, an enlightened generation. An enlightened generation that had spiritually evolved people. So there are many commentaries that explain how is it possible that they could have done this. The basic explanation on a very practical, technical level is that the reason they were able to do it is because they miscalculated. Moses said he's coming down in 40 days. They counted from the first day, and it was 40 days, it was only 39, but they miscalculated. They saw he wasn't coming down, so they panicked. Well, they felt they were abandoned. And the golden calf was for them a way to replace Moses. There are many, many other explanations. Not here's the place to go. Whatever it is, I want to just focus on a psychological explanation, one that's relevant to us. Because as I said, there are many different ways to understand this. And that is, I'm just using an example. If you're traveling in a desert, right? And in this desert you become extremely thirsty. And you are not able to find any water. So what do? At some point, you get desperate. You just make mistakes. And something comes your way. Here's a drink. You may not even think. You just, what's it called? You not gobble. That's food. What does it say when you just gulp it down? What? Chug it down? Fine. Good. Gulp, chug. That's more like beer. Yeah. Right.
Some of us are 23.
Okay. And some don't have to be reminded. It's like when you turn 21, it's like a big achievement. Then there's a point where, okay, I wish I was 21. I wish I was, What? Chug it down. Fine. And you may end up drinking something toxic and then dangerous, destructive. What happened here? What happened is that the thirst overwhelmed you, and you did whatever it took. I mentioned this, I don't know if I mentioned last week or 2 weeks ago. I was once speaking to a group of, I don't know how you call it, teens at risk, but this was, they already had, the risk already had happened. This is, they're already on the rebound. So how do you say, teens at risk that were rebounding, rebounding, okay, let's put it this way. And they had gone through some of them almost OD'd, difficult drug and alcohol and other types of addictions. I know several of them, so they asked me to speak for them. So we had this informal conversation, it was off the record, and somewhere I brought up the point. I said to them, so tell me, how did you all get where how you got to your low point? How did it all begin? At this point you're already all trying to get your act together, realize the mistakes you made, and so on. But how did it all begin? What was like the first mistake you made? I mean, these were people who acknowledged that they made mistakes, and that's where they wanted to resolve or heal from it. So, different theories. Some said it was bad friends. Some said it was this, some that. But it came down to, I suggested to them that maybe it began with something which is almost very innocuous. It's called boredom. Boredom. To be bored. So boredom doesn't sound like very dangerous. So you're bored. Who's not bored once in a while? Or maybe more than a once in a while. And but boredom is what's called a vacuum. And nature abhors a vacuum, and humans abhor vacuums. So vacuum itself is not destructive, but what a vacuum does can be extremely destructive. Because it is what is it called? Like a glue, a trap. It's quicksand. Everything will stick to a vacuum because it's so empty. And you'll look for a high. The most addictive personalities are often the greatest souls. Because mediocre people don't become addicted. They're not extremes. Mediocre people have mediocre passions. You can bumper sticker that if you like. Like the kid that comes home from school, the girl comes home from school and she got a B+ on her report. So her father said, listen, either a F- or an A+, but not mediocre. Okay? Mediocrity. So the Talmud says, Kol hagadol mechaver yitzre gadol mimenu, the greater the person, the greater the yetzer hara. Because there's energy. Energy is powerful. Energy can go both ways. That's the rule. The more powerful the energy, look, nuclear energy, one of the most powerful energies, can cause also the most damage. It's always that way. Power is power. Power is neutral. And it depends how you use it, how you harness it, or not harness it. So, the same is true with love, which is why love is the root of all great things and also the root of most disaster. If you want to be more specific, sexuality within that category specifically. So now here you have these great souls coming out of Egypt, standing by Mount Sinai. You can only imagine what kind of revelation they experienced. So these are extremely passionate souls who are on fire. And when you're on fire, it's always very dangerous. Their intentions were very pure. They were not malicious. But you can make big mistakes. And that's exactly what they did. They're in desperate search for transcendence. To the point it says when they heard the 10 Commandments, this is a few days before they built the golden calf, it says each called kol dibur parcha neshmasa. Every word that came out of the 10 Commandments, parcha, their souls expired. Parcha literally means their souls flew away. Parcha. And God had to revive them because they were experiencing very high levels of transcendence. Now what happens after a high? If you don't get another high, it's big trouble. And Moses was now on the mountain for almost 40 days. Moses was their channel, was their mentor. He was the one that helped them get there. And so it wasn't a small matter. 39 days doesn't sound like a lot of time, but a lot of time for a person who's in a desert, very thirsty. Here in the case of spirituality. So it was their spiritual hunger that was their undoing, which of course was even a greater betrayal from God's point of view. Because if it was some type of petty mistake, or some type of mediocre mistake, it's one thing. Here it was like in the heart of the whole thing, you're talking about a relationship with God. And they messed it up big time. They found another God. Not they were looking to do, they were looking for transcendence. Now it's hard for us to imagine, because for us the Yetzer Hara for Avodah Zarah doesn't exist today. The Talmud says that the Yetzer Hara, the inclination, the temptation for idolatry doesn't even make sense to us. Who has like a temptation? We have plenty of temptations. But idol worship isn't one of them. Right? So the Talmud says that doesn't exist. But if you think of it from the point of view of transcendent spirituality, and it was a way for spirituality, think of it no different than a spiritual drug. That's what it was once upon a time. And that's what happened there. What it means to us is the same thing with us. We have deep love inside of our hearts. We're born with it. It's a very powerful force. And unfortunately, if you don't develop the tools, or you develop the wrong tools, bad tools, usually based, as I said, based on parents and anything that happens to us in our formative years, what you have is a very powerful force with very screwed up instruments. What's the result of that equation? You got trouble. Because you're not dealing with a small force. If it was, not love, it's one thing. Here you're talking about tremendous intense energy that will only grow stronger as we get older. And what's with the instruments? So the energy doesn't stop flowing just because you don't got the instruments. So what happens? It just overwhelms and you'll do whatever it takes. Which is why there's so many distortions in that area. And why it's so difficult to fix it. Why is it difficult to fix? Because it's not some type of objective, like you say, I made a mistake, now I observe it, let me go and I'll fix I painted the wall the wrong way, I'll repaint it. You're dealing with emotional intensity that you are completely subjective about. You can't even see most of the mistakes. Because you were blind by it. Because it's love. Like I said, like that thirsty person, you can't really see how thirsty you are. You're the person, you're the object. We never see ourselves in an objective light. So that's why it was so difficult for Moses to get forgiveness here, because he was dealing with a very difficult situation. What was he supposed to tell? What's the response to God? That what? The Jews have passion. So God is saying, so they have passion and they don't know how to discipline themselves. What do you want me to do? Forgive them and they'll get back to make the same mistake again. Well, this is why Moses had to work very hard in figuring out how do you not just forgive and go back to square one, but how do we develop tools? Which is why God reveals to Moses in these days in Elul, and especially, which we focus on, especially in Yom Kippur, when Moses finally finishes the 40 days, God says, here are instruments. He doesn't just say, here's forgiveness. They're called the 13 attributes of mercy. Yud Gimel Midas Arachim. God reveals to Moses a whole new set of tools. It deserves its own book, if not many books, just to write a book on these 13 tools. In 60 days, I tried to make a summary at least of each of the 13 and what its power is. But if this is a revelation that came only as a result of challenge, and Moses elicits it from God, something he could not elicit when the Torah was given on Shavuos 40 days. This came only to be able to achieve tshuva, which means it's a far deeper love than the initial one. The initial love is just love in a healthy way. But how do you find love after it's been betrayed and broken? You have to dig a lot deeper to find even better instruments. So it's one thing if you can teach someone healthy instruments from childhood on, then great. But if they've messed it up, and now you have to dig deeper and find better new instruments, or more refined ones, then they're going to be a lot more powerful ones. Which is why Yom Kippur is far, far greater day than Shavuos. Because Yom Kippur is a day where we have the ability to go into what the Kabbalists call Yechidah Shebenefesh, the essence of the soul, the fifth dimension. So we have 5 levels of soul. We have Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, Chai, Yechidah. Nefesh is biological life. Ruach is emotional life. Neshama is intellectual life. Chai is transcendental life, which is where they messed up. And Yechidah is the transcendence of transcendence, which means you even transcend transcendent. And that allows You have to develop entirely new tools. So the first lesson of this is that there's no such thing as damaged goods, and there's hope for everybody. That's number one. And there's every year another Yom Kippur, just in case last year's didn't work. That's one. So the Yechidah remains intact. That doesn't mean that you can just rely on it, because it still needs a lot of digging to get there. And it's far easier to do it the right way the first time than to break it and fix it. But that doesn't mean it can't be. So there is that ability to go to visit the engine room, so to speak, and rewire ourselves and develop a new set of instruments. That's number one. Number two, as far as what those instruments are like themselves, so this brings me back to the love and like thing. The reason that God said, okay, look, the love is there, but I don't like them, was because of the way they behave. So the question is, how do you balance the two, where what you love is commensurate with what you like, and what you like is commensurate with what you love? Well, this requires, obviously, going into the heart of what real love is all about. If it's a love based on needs, then there's no question, then the French are right. At some point, the needs are not being met, or at some point they become a plateau, it becomes somewhat boring, it becomes a conventional, regular, pedestrian. So therefore you need something more, and those needs drive you to try to find something that is not of the regular. But if love is about transcendence, true transcendence, then if you are bored with something, that's your problem. Instead of taking the easy route, maybe you have to dig a little deeper and look for new ways to experience the love that you want. So let's go back to the people in the golden calf. I mentioned transcendence of transcendence. I know I mentioned it quickly and probably didn't really know what I'm talking about, but I'll tell you what I'm talking about. When I was writing Toward a Meaningful Life, so I remember when I wrote the first chapter, the draft, I looked at it, I read it, though I'd written it, and I hated what I read. I did not like. I didn't love it either, so it was no love and no like, both not. And I remember I actually panicked inside, and I said, I write a book that I don't like, it's not exactly going to work. And I didn't see this as being my so-called penitence for all my mistakes. I have to write a book I don't like. So I remember I talked to somebody, a colleague at the time, and I mentioned to him. So he said, "Let me see what you wrote." So I showed. He said, "It's pretty good. I like what you write." Okay, yeah, but that doesn't help me so much. But he gave me a very simple piece of advice, which was so simple. I don't know why I didn't think of it myself, but I guess I was overcome by the moment. He said, "Why don't you sit down and write down on paper what you don't like about it, and then fix it?" Brilliant, right? I just didn't like the whole thing. You just don't like it. I don't know where to begin. But he was right, so that's what I did. After I got over not liking it, I read it again, and I started marking. I didn't like this, I didn't like this. I think the tone of this line, diagnose it instead of just saying I don't like it. Which is usually a healthy way of dealing with a problem, because you can't 100% you don't like any of it and nothing salvageable. Rarely is that a situation, but it's hard to do when you're in a moment of emotion and you're over. So I wrote 102 different things I didn't like about it. I still have that paper in my files, and then I proceeded to look at what the gist of it, and I fixed it. But two things stood out, I remember very clearly to me when I wrote it. I'll see in a moment why I'm sharing this. And that was, what I really didn't like, it sounded to me too self-helpish. I've read too many books like this. So maybe some ideas were original, but not. But I didn't like that element to it. The second thing, I didn't feel what we call sanctity. I didn't feel a sense of awe, a sense of holiness, whatever the word you want to use. I felt it was that's what I meant by the self-help. It was nice pseudo, whatever you call it, psychobabble, or nice words, but I didn't feel a sense of resonation of a higher truth, to put it that way. And the second thing was, I felt it was too, what was the word? Abstract. It was not tangible. It wasn't concrete. Ideas, thoughts, spiritual. And after a while, I came to realize that these two problems, even though they sound different, were exactly the same problem. And then I came to an epiphany, which changed everything. Literally changed everything. The epiphany was that in Judaism, a key distinction between Jewish mysticism and other schools of mysticism is that you can achieve more through an act, reach higher, greater heights than through meditation. Which sounds counterintuitive. An act is so tangible, so limited. What's an act? Meditation is, you in your best place. You create space, you meditate, you contemplate, you imagine. You can dream far more than what you can do in an act. Even if you're a great dreamer, an act is always a limiting element. But the reason for that is, why? Because an act forces you to transcend your own transcendence, and meditation doesn't force you to get out of yourself. And you could have what we call spiritual arrogance. Some people are arrogant materially, and some people are arrogant spiritually. I'm a spiritual guy. I really get it. I understand the goal. I understand the ethereal levels. Other people, all they care about is money and power and so on. It's actually a far more dangerous arrogance because it's so much more subtle. It's not, it's not so concrete in a certain way. And then I came to the realization that in Jewish thought, it's not you travel from the material world to the spiritual world and that's it. There's one more level. There's matter, spirit, God. And God is not more spirit than he is matter. And that's why the material world, the action, is just as close to God, if not closer, than the spirit. So usually you think in terms of, are you a body-like life or a soul-like life? That's it. What other option is there? There's another option. As the Avodas HaKodesh, Ibn Gabbai, the great Kabbalist, writes, just as God has the power to create the finite, he has the power to create the infinite. That means he's neither finite nor infinite, and is equally distant from matter than from spirit. So, in Jewish thought, completely different than it is in Far Eastern, the body is not more distant from God than the soul is. As a matter of fact, in some ways the body is closer, precisely because it has no revelations. So Chaya, the 5 levels of the soul. The level of Chaya is transcendence. Is beyond intellect, beyond emotions, beyond biological life. And Yechida, Yom Kippur is Yechida, it's not Chaya. Chaya is transcendence. Yechida is transcendence of transcendence. You don't even take your transcendence seriously. So there's a complete no self there. That's why, for a person, here's the story. The Mittler Rebbe was sitting and studying, and a child fell out of the crib, started crying. His father, the Alter Rebbe, heard the child. His son didn't, because he was so immersed in his study. So who was greater? You'd think, hey, he's so immersed. Wow, he's a really spiritual guy. The father probably must not have been so immersed. That's why he's able to hear the cry of a child. His father later reprimanded him and told him, you don't hear a cry of a child while you're busy with your spiritual meditations? What does that tell you? It's about you. Which is why a person who has that type of arrogance and spiritual arrogance, I have no time for small people. I have no time for a little act. That is far more destructive. And when a person like that moves away from their own spiritual aspirations, not material ones, and they break their will and desire to be connected spiritually, they achieve a greater spiritual revelation than they do when they're in their spiritual realm. Which explains on a Yom Kippur story, that same Alter Rebbe, once in the middle of davening, at the height of the Yom Kippur prayer, he suddenly leaves the synagogue. No one knew where he went, and they found later that he went to some widow who was with a little sick child to help her make some food for the child, to set up the fire. On Yom Kippur. He couldn't send a messenger, he couldn't send any of his students. Because B'koach Nefesh, saving a life is more important than your spiritual growth and heights. And that is the secret. And that's what I've mentioned many times. There are many great thinkers, philosophers, and mystics that lived in history. Maybe one of the greatest was Aristotle and others. But all of them, not one, we know about any of their children or grandchildren. We don't even know if they had children or grandchildren. Because they had no time to diaper children. They're busy with spiritual insights. Who has time for nonsense like that? For Narishkeiten, as they say, for details. Abraham, when God wants to destroy the city of Sodom, the Torah tells us an interesting line. It says, Vashem Omer Amachas Anim Avram. Am I going to conceal from Avram, from Abraham, the fact that I'm going to destroy the city? Why is the Torah telling us that God's thoughts, he wants to not tell him? Well, he didn't want to tell him because he knew Abraham was going to give him a hard time, which he did do. So the Torah tells us, am I going to conceal? But he says, why? And then he says, how could I conceal from a man that dedicated his life and his family, Baisei Achrav, Lasa Tzedakah Mishpat, to do justice and to be kind and just. The focus there is that he didn't just, because he not was a spiritual guy, he committed his family to it. He taught his son, Isaac, who would teach his children, and we have it now today, almost 3,800 years later. He transcended his own transcendence. That is far, far greater. Now you may think this is all that was going through my mind when I was redoing that chapter. Yes, it was. Maybe not quite these words. And that's what I changed. I introduced into this something in the book, which was the main thing that bothered me was not details. Those were the two things I couldn't put my finger on. One, it was not divine. I didn't feel it was God. It was spiritual, but not divine. And number two, it didn't come down to action. It remained in this amorphous type of place. And I changed that. If you look at the book, you'll see. To the point that my agent, when he saw the chapter, I remember on marriage, he says, how many times do you say God in this chapter? I said, as much as necessary, because I didn't want it to be a spiritual guide to love. I wanted to introduce a dimension, because spiritual is not enough. It could also be selfish. You have to introduce something that's beyond even the spiritual aspirations we have. This doesn't mean we shouldn't have spiritual aspirations, but it means never get comfortable. And it's maybe an undercurrent and a subliminal message, but I know as the author, I know that I planted in there big time, because it bothered me. I came to it through tshuva, not through initially. I didn't do it initially. It came on the second bounce. So to go back to our discussion here, the key thing that Yom Kippur and then these 60 days and Yud Gimel Midas Harachimim, that was not revealed the first 40 days God gave Moses the law. In the next 80 days he gave him the power of hope and forgiveness. Because it's one thing when you get it initially, okay, this is the operator manual. Let's go around and try to find the manual that fixes a machine. That's a far bigger manual than the one that tells you how to operate it. Because now you have to contend with all the problems that took place. And now you have to rebuild tools that have been damaged or have been compromised. And that's far much harder to do, because you're midstream. It's not like a new child, okay, let's start with a new nation and we'll do it right this time. You're dealing midstream, like the doctor, the surgeon, the heart surgeon that goes to the mechanic. And the mechanic is just very curious. He says, how much you get paid an hour? So he said, I don't know, heart surgery, whatever. $10,000 an hour, $20,000, where do they get these guys? He says, why is it that I fix your car, which is also mechanics, engineering, and I get $50 an hour, and you get like $10,000, $20,000 an hour? So the doctor asked him, well, try fixing the car when it's driving 90 miles an hour, I'm fixing a heart, not when it's stopped, it's when it's in the middle of motion. I don't know if it justifies that price. You can take it up with the insurance companies, but I'm just using it for my purpose. The meaning here, you have to deal with it already in the middle. Try to rewire a company while it's in motion. It's not that simple to re-engineer something while it's going at full speed. And that was the challenge. How do you develop those tools? And that's the 13 attributes that goes back to how do you learn to like something you love when you understand that love is much more than you think it is. It's not about your needs. So it's true, on a very basic level, you could say, okay, someone marries, two people marry, like the marriage therapists like to remind any couple after 10 years, they say, those long conversations you had on your early dates, you never have them again in your entire life. You know that, right? Which sounds quite depressing, of course. But what happens is, okay, two people, and we're assuming it's a healthy love, It'll just make things easier for this discussion. Because if it isn't, there's other issues to deal with. But then they get used to each other. You start knowing everything about each other. That's never good for a dynamic relationship. It's inevitably going to go into automatic pilot, routine. As I said before, tainuk to me ain't a tainuk. So what's the solution? The solution is that you have to learn to transcend your own love. And that doesn't mean not to love and to forego your needs. That's not what I'm saying. It means that you have to learn not to just say rely on whatever is here. Let's see we can squeeze this lemon out and see how much more. How much more can you squeeze? We know each other. The fact is, the soul is an infinite reservoir, and there's a mystique in human beings that even people we know very well have a mystique. The problem is, once you get used to them, you don't feel motivated to dig deeper into that mystique. That's what happens. It's far easier to meet a new person, and there the mystique just begins again. So you're basically just going back to not having to force to go further, because you're not forcing yourself to transcend yourself again. You did that already. You fell in love with somebody, so there's transcendence. To transcend transcendence requires a real deep bittul, and that's the only way. To learn to dig into a person's soul, that person you love, and see what else do they have, was the key to finding ways to like them that you may have lost. We don't do that because, as I said, it's much easier not to. It's also much less vulnerable to. You've reached a certain place, and that's fine. You want a novelty, you got to go do something else. So yes, two people really love each other. I know this may sound like a fairy tale. Would really not need to travel anywhere. Would not need to do any type of outer stimulation. They could sit with each other, and if they had that ability, they would be able to probe for the rest of their lives and dig deeper and deeper. But it would require hard work, which is why we do need to have sometimes outer stimulation. I'm not suggesting that's the way to do it, but never replacing it. Outer stimulation. In other words, like some couples tell me, the only way we're going to stay together is we keep traveling and finding new things to do. But how many restaurants can you go to? That's after a while. I mean, New York does have its share of restaurants, but what are they doing? They're using it as a crutch because they have nothing else that stimulates. So they constantly need a new show, so to speak. So to say that we all need certain stimulation, obviously, we all need something, but the real objective is, and this is true on every possible level, is that, are you saying that your soul, you've come to a place there's no more inside of you? So I told this to a couple a few weeks ago who love each other, but they're both playing around because they need excitement, So I said to the guy, I wanted to speak to him privately. I said to him, let me ask you something. You think you probed and excavated all your greatest potential? He says, no, I have so much more. He says, and what about your wife? You think you've reached the deepest in her? And he's not a stupid guy. He says, yeah, but we're both lazy. We don't want to go there. So in other words, we all believe that we have more within us than we have so far experienced. So why don't you believe that other person also does? And maybe that's your challenge. But that requires work, and that requires transcending yourself. And transcending yourself means getting out of your comfort zone. So even transcendence has its comfort zone. Even spirituality has its comfort zone. That's what the Jews, the big mistake they made. They didn't go, they built a golden calf may sound like a simple thing. No, they didn't go ahead and have a stag party. They built a golden calf. They did some other things too, but it was not simplistic stuff that they did. It was spiritual stuff that they were doing. That was why it was so dangerous. And instead of looking and having the bittul and saying, you know what, all this is not here for 40 days, maybe we have to just be humble and stop wanting so much spirituality. Maybe it's time to be quiet and just accept. No. Their hunger got the better of them and they acted. So that lesson of being able to transcend yourself is the secret to real life. That's why the Jewish people are here 3,800 years later, because Abraham never allowed his own soul, he never took himself more seriously than the cause. So as spiritual as he was, he knew what the bottom line was. And the contrast is very clear. Show me someone else in history. That's why you don't have any great thinker that created a civilization, that created a community that continued, because they weren't focused on that. Now, Aristotle wrote brilliant stuff on government and community and structure, but he didn't build it himself. He wrote the books about it. He didn't do it in his own environment. And that was the key, that the Jews knew that that's the bottom line. It's not enough to be spiritual. The spirituality would have died with them, because how long can you maintain that? What they did was they built a family unit around it, which may sound simple, but it's not simple for a spiritual person to do. It's far harder for a spiritual person to build a family than not to, because it means you have to get involved in the nitty-gritty, as I said, in details and stuff that is very mundane, not always pleasant, But look when a mother or a father engage with their child, and when there's no fireworks and there's no cameras and no one watching, those are the moments of truth. That's what Hasidic thought would say is Atzmus itself. The essence itself is expressed. You know why? Because there are no fireworks. So look at the difference between Matan Torah now and Yom Kippur. Matan Torah was fireworks. It was a light and sound show. The first light and sound show ever. If you read, it was Kelos Brokim, there was sound, there was thunder, there was lightning, there was fire, there was smoke. It was a show. A shofar. I mean, I would love to be able to recreate it. It's a pretty cool show, going on there. What about Yom Kippur? What happened in Yom Kippur when Moses came down with the tablets? Total silence. And this is not an accident. Rashi says, from Medrash, because the first ones were done with such fanfare, it created an ayin hara. It means it attracted attention. It created arrogance, basically. Everyone's so proud of what's going on. It was a party. So this time, he said, with humility. The second tablets is going to be Yom Kippur. It's going to be a solemn day. It's quiet. Moses came down. There was no dancing. Yeah, you want to dance? Next week, Simchas Torah, but not that day. No, they do. That's why we dance on Simchas Torah. But that day, humility. So the question is, what's greater? Serving God with sound or with silence? So this is a question of the Zohar. The Zohar says the Kohanim, the priests, when they serve, they don't utter a word. They're quiet. It's complete hush. When the Levim serve, they sing. They compose songs and they sing. So intuitively, initially we would say, well, song is far deeper than silence. And yet, before Simon and Garfunkel, we learned the Zohar says that the sound of silence is deeper than the sound of sound. Because sound manifests something. It's some expression. Where silence is no expression at all. Silence is an essential experience. And you look in our own souls, what do you see? You see, but you have to express the deepest parts of yourself, you have no words. You talk about the weather, sports, gossip, the words don't stop flowing. Just all turn on radio or anything. Why is it superficial things we can just talk? Someone says, tell me something about yourself. Quiet. So initially you could say because you don't trust. But even with someone you trust, you're not going to find many words. Why is it that a hug, an embrace, expresses a lot more than any words can express? Because words are containers. And containers, by definition, are limited. So here's a container. How much water can it contain? Whatever the size of this cup is. We demonstrated for the cyberspace audience. Okay? Specimen 1. Now, you want more energy, you need a bigger container. But then, so how do you widen and expand containers? So we create a language called poetry, metaphor. So metaphor, precisely because it is not so defined, which is why many people hate poetry, because why don't you just tell us what you want to say? What do you have to which is what I used to ask my literature teachers. I say, why do they have to write it backwards? And frankly, the teachers really didn't know what to answer. They usually would say, when you get older, you'll understand. And then you get older and you realize that that's what you tell children. So So it's like the emperor with no clothes. The child says, "1 second, this poetry. Is this what is this anyway?" But in truth, jokes aside, it's really because conventional language is limited, and it's precisely the metaphor that's not so clear that broadens the container and opens your imagination. Then there's energy that even metaphor is not enough. So you need an oivei, a cry, a laugh, can capture more than all the words. A look. And then there's a point, Kol Lo Yishtama, like the Zohar says about shofar, there's a voice that has no voice. Called the Mamadaka, sometimes the expression. Which is what? In a negative sense, as you see sometimes when there's somebody has a terrible trauma, God forbid, no one should ever know. The shock is so intense, they can't even cry. And that's the way it's supposed to be. Then there's a stage they should cry. Because nothing can express, not even a sound can express. So sound is a container. And at that stage, nothing can express it. So that's what it says. Eliyahu Hanavi, looking for God. So it says he was not barash. He was not in the thunder. Loiba Eish, not in the fire, not in the lightning. And Loiba Rash, Loiba Eish, Loiba, what's the third one? I forgot. Thunder, lightning. It's the third expression there. And it says, where did he find God? In the subtle, gentle voice. And that's Yom Kippur. That's why silence is deeper than sound. So, a person wants to start liking what they love. They have to start digging deeper. You're not going to just like it in the same terms as you liked something the first time you saw it. You have to dig deeper. And dig deeper needs silence. It needs humility. It needs to be able to transcend your transcendence. You need to be able to, if you really love somebody, why don't you make an adventure to discover something every day new about that person? And if you think there's a limit, look at yourself. You think there's limits in discovering about yourself? Our egos would not like to hear that. So there is an unlimited element, and especially if you understand a soul, materialism, there's a limit. But the soul is endless. The soul is unfathomable. It's a mystique. And it's not about quantitative growth. I'll learn something new, a new secret every day. It's qualitative. It's learning to grow in your sublime nature. In Hasidic thought, when we talk about the Seder Shtalshalos, the structure, the cosmic order, you travel, let's say, from Asiya to Yetzirah to Bria to Atzilus. I'll explain that in a moment. It's the worlds. You're not just 4 worlds. Okay, you know what? Today we made stop here. Now we're going to the next stop and next stop, next stop. It's 4 levels of deeper spiritual experience. Think of it like this. The lowest world is material. You come to discover within matter there's energy. But then you come to discover that within energy there's deeper energy. And then you come to discover that within the unconscious there's a deeper level of the unconscious and a deeper level. That is an experience where you begin to love and like the thing that you're experiencing. Because you're not doing it just on your terms. So it's a constant process of shedding the layers, which yesterday to you were so tangible, or on the contrary, yesterday was very abstract. Once you reach there, then you have to go to a deeper state of, a higher state of consciousness. And that requires, obviously, work. And that is what ultimate real love is about. When you see the symbols of love, like a flower. So as the poets like to remind us, why is a flower such a symbol of love? Besides its colors and its gentleness and its erotic nature or whatever, it also is on a simple level, the petals. They show you mystique, that there's petals within petals within petals. And that you see a certain depth. It's a symbolism of a type of dimensions within dimensions within dimensions. Any type of description of, any type of romantic description of something that's loving is that type of understanding. There's a mystique within a mystique within a mystique. The problem is we live in a world where we like control and we like definitions, and we don't want to let go on that level. But you know something? That's true love. Learning to let go, or to put it in different terms, and I use this in Torah Meaningful Life, celebrating your vulnerability. What do you think about that? Most people don't like the word vulnerability, let alone celebrating it. Why would I celebrate my vulnerability? Vulnerability is like weakness. It means I'm fragile. It means I'm vulnerable to be hurt. Yeah, for someone who's been hurt and is fighting for their turf, it's a very dangerous word. It's a very frightening word. But it's not frightening to somebody who has an intact soul. That person has the comfort and the security to travel further and further, to continuously let go. I think I mentioned this when I was a kid. Summer, since we're concluding summer, why not tell you one of my summer stories? I shared this, I believe. So I remember learning to swim. I was a pretty good swimmer. But then came the day, I don't know, I was 8 or 9 years old, to learn how to dive. And this was a whole other problem. This is a whole thing. It was a major issue for me. So I remember standing summers at the diving board. When that was too high, I went to the edge of the pool, and I make these countdowns. On one day, I'll count to 10, then I'll count to another 10, another 10. I kept counting every day, and the summers passed, and I didn't dive. I was terrified of diving into the water. Whatever, the frightening thought that maybe a belly flop or something, and your stomach will rip open like they tell you if you swim after you eat, like all your insides will come out or something, which I don't think ever happens, but that's whatever. Children, things adults tell us, God Almighty. So, anyway, this was like a little ridiculous. I mean, I guess from a child's perspective, it's a little exaggerated, but I remember summer. Now, what was the problem? I knew how to swim. It wasn't like I was afraid of water. I was in water. I swam all the time. Middle of the water, deep water, and so on. And I knew how to stand there. What was this fear that I had? Anyway, as usually, how do you overcome fears? No, it wasn't therapy. It was the good old style. One of my friends pushed me in. Now, mind you, this was after I came to a whole new trick. Instead of trying to dive standing, I said, you know what, I'll sit on the edge of the pool and just get myself like that. And even that was frightening. And then, of course, someone snuck up behind me, and I was in the pool, and I didn't die. And that was it. After that, I learned all the different types of dives, and thank God I became a good diver as well. And it always stuck with me. What was this thing? And here's my theory. I think I came to it when I heard a story. There was a chassid, his name was Mendel Futterfass, who sat many years in prison in Siberia for his so-called counter-revolutionary activity, which means basically practicing Judaism. You can call that counter-revolutionary, right? So to keep himself sane, one of the things he did, he wasn't in a prison, physical prison, it was in this place in Siberia where he couldn't go, travel anywhere. It was like a gulag. But interestingly, the communists liked to send, who else was there? No criminals were there, frankly. The criminals were in control. The ones that were there were all talented people, artists, writers, musicians. Anyone that was a free thinker was a danger. Okay, so the criminals were running the country, and the talent was in the gulag. So Mendel Futterfass was very stimulated by these people. They were very intelligent, and they would put on. They also had, a lot of them were also in the arts and in athletics and stuff. So they would put on a circus from time to time, and everybody showed their stunts. They were tightrope walkers, they were jugglers, they were this, they were that. And to keep himself going, he would learn lessons about serving God from these people. Everything was like a lesson. There's interesting different stories that not for now. There was a guy he actually found who was a deep sea diver. He would deep sea dive for treasures under the water. He learned the whole lesson from him, how you get up, heavy ships that sank through balloons, and it was very interesting. But anyway, the story I wanted to share was there was this tightrope walker who he was friendly with, and when they put on one of these shows, this tightrope walker, did his job, and then afterwards they started talking, and he asked me, what do you think the secret to tightrope walking is? So he was guessing. The balance, that seems like the hardest part, the balance on the rope, and not fall over. And the tightrope walker says to him, no, the real secret is focus. You set your eyes on something down the other end of the tightrope, and you learn to walk a straight line toward it. It's not about, if you start focusing on the string, you're no way you're going to master, because the string is just like, how could somebody walk on a string? But he says it's learning to walk that type of focus. It's almost like taking your mind off the string, actually. And then he said to him, man, what do you think is the hardest part in tightrope walking? So again, he said, probably right in the middle. When the edges, you can run to the edge. Here in the middle, you're middle of nowhere. You can't hold on to anything. If you don't make it, you're going to fall. He says, no. The hardest part when you make the turn, actually on the edge, because you have to create a new focus. Because it takes for a second, you have to turn around and then find a new focal point because you've turned. That was what he said to him. So Mendelford made a whole thing from this about, finding your focal point in life. If you don't have a focal point, you're always on a tightrope, and you're going to fall. The reason I mention it is because here's the thought I had about the diving. The fear I had was not the water, because clearly, as I said, I had no fear of water. The fear was that split second, when you're neither on the ground nor in the water. When you've never done it, there's like that suspension. So unconsciously, you just fear it because it's different. You don't know what it is. Now, obviously, you could say, I'm just jumping, I'm going to be in the water in a second. Yeah, but that split second is something you're not used to. All of us find it difficult to change, not because the new situation may be difficult, it's because you're in a situation where you already found comfort. And it may even be like the known evil, better than the unknown evil. But that split second of something different throws us off because you're not in control. Right in midair, where are you? You're not here, you're not there. So it's nothing to do with how long it takes. It's just it's a frozen moment in the unconscious of fear. The lack of that type of focus. But it's the key to all growth. So I was saying it simply because that's one of the great challenges we have in moving deeper and deeper in a relationship. And I speak to myself just as I speak to you. We get into our inertia mode, where we glide, or automatic pilot, or whatever you want to call it. There's nothing wrong with that for a short period of time. There's also nothing wrong with it in superficial things in life. You don't need to make an entire meditation of every time you brush your teeth. But if you're talking about a relationship with someone, especially one that may be becoming stagnant, and one that has reached a certain plateau, and there's love and there's no liking, then it's not a matter of just a small little option. Then it's a necessity. Same thing is in our relationship with God. Today you find many people who are observant. It's mechanical Judaism. It's cultural Judaism. There's no growth involved. There's no personal evolution or development. I'm not trying to talk negative about it anyway. There are many beautiful people. But if something comes in a routine, there's always trouble. It may not be today, but routines don't create healthy futures. Now, don't get me wrong. A good habit that's a routine is better than a bad habit, better than not having a habit at all. But if it's a routine, what happens is it's like death. It starts dying. It's not growing. And if you're not growing, you're dying. If you're not busy living, you're busy dying. You're not busy being born, you're busy dying, as they say. So to go back to the initial theme, liking and loving, now I feel responsible. I have to go contact my siblings and say, I don't just love you, but I also like you, and figure out why. Okay, but that's part of if I'm preaching it, I got to do it. The point is that when you love somebody and it's real love, yes, you should be invested in wanting to figure out how you can like them, how you can like them as well. And that takes sometimes deeper digging, absolutely. And the other way around, which means to like something, that doesn't always mean you have to love it. Some things we like, you may like ice cream or chocolates or other things. I don't think we should call it love, even though we use the word, I love it, But I mean to say, it better not to be very permanent. That's good for temporary, which we'll call it, temporary panaceas, temporary escapes. So, we learned from Moses on the mountain how to develop these tools, and we learn from how we should develop it amongst each other. If you begin to love a person's soul, you come to understand that soul has unfathomable and deeper recesses all the time, and you find ways to access it. And that itself is quite an adventure. Instead of just looking to find the next high. It means traveling qualitatively into something and not just another quantitative rush. And that's the bottom line. So in this month of Elul, when we have the opportunity to revisit, to soul search into our own souls, it's also a time to maybe look at ourselves and say, we may have self-love, but you also like yourself. Some of us don't like ourselves. We love ourselves because there's a thing called self-preservation. But liking yourself means liking your tools, liking how you behave. I know it's not like sit in the mirror and say, I hate you, but some people do have self-loathing. So it's an opportunity to also maybe discover parts of yourself, like who do you think you are that you don't like yourself, that type of thing. So arrogance doesn't always take the posture of feeling so great about yourself. Arrogance can also take the posture of being self-deprecating. But that too is arrogance. You know why? Because who do you think you are that you can say you're nobody? Look who thinks he's nobody, like that joke. So it's an opportunity, also within ourselves. Because ultimately, how we see ourselves and our own souls is how we ultimately interact with others. So, to conclude on the Kotzker Rebbe's line that I mentioned last week, but I'll say it again because I like how it sounds, is that if I am I because you are you, and you are you because I am not, and you are not. But if I am I because I am I, and you are you because you are you, I am and you are. Which simply means that identity should be defined from within itself, not by proximity and the definition of others, their expectations, or like I said, an inner focal point. Every one of you, every one of us has it. You have it by your birthright, by the fact that you were created in the divine image. So as much as you think about the rest of yourself, how could one not like a divine image? It's a pretty cool thing to have inside of you, a piece of God. Now I know some people don't like God. That's another story. So maybe, but with the Yitzchak Berditchever said, the God you don't believe in, I also don't believe. The God you don't like, I also don't like. That's maybe not God. Or like that atheist that wrote and said, I hate you as if you existed. You ever hear that one? You can do as you wish with that. So God should bless us all, that we shall learn to love and like ourselves, and learn to love and like those that we love. And remember, everything takes effort and work, but it's worth the effort and work because the result, the fruit of our labor, is lefum tsar agra, means commensurate to the tsar, to the challenge, to the pain, to the difficulty, is agra, is the reward. So it's all like planting seeds that bear beautiful trees and fruits. Deep roots bear beautiful fruits. And that's how it is. We live in a world where we worship commodities, acquisitions, when in truth, all real things in life, especially love, cannot be acquired. It emerges, and it's always a result of a process. And more on that coming week. So everyone should have a very loving week, a likable week, and a week of growth. Those of you that are receiving the 60-day emails know what that's about. If you'd like to share it with others, feel free to. Those that are not familiar with it, if you leave your email address, or send out every day. It's like meditation and exercise for the day. We also have the book available here, 60 days. Philip will be giving his class this week, tomorrow night, 7. And I will be here next week, Wednesday night, please God. And until then, use your time well, and use this month well. It has great opportunities for all of us, especially in the area of love and relationships. So thank you all so much.